I think for many of us who live, Pepe, outside of the United States, we have to understand that there is no difference between the Trump administration and the establishment in the United States when it comes to the foreign policy of the United
Of
States.
course not. He was vetoed by them. Otherwise, he'll never become president.
And Venezuela shows that to us because you see the policy of Donald Trump in Venezuela and Nobel Peace Prize. Nobel Peace Prize is not in the hand of the Trump administration. Actually, they hate Trump. But you see the outcome, these vectors coming to Venezuela, the outcome is the same, what the establishment wants.
Of course. It's another. I think this is the real definition of the continuity of government. It's not continuity of government if they suffer a nuclear attack. No, continuity of government in terms of the psyche, in terms of the mindset, in terms of the imperial priorities, in terms of the imperatives for the empire. Now that it's losing ground literally everywhere, geopolitically and geoeconomically, it goes back to the ultra basics, natural resources. We need to take over natural resources. It doesn't matter where and no matter what.
Pepe, in less than a year, we had Russia unveiling four next generation nuclear weapon system. Oreshnik, four, it doesn't, but it can be, armed with nuclear weapon. And we have Poseidon, Brevesnik, and various. When you look at what's going on with Russia, and is that all about, do you think what's going on right now is that the East, let's put it this way, Russia, China, and the global South is showing that they have some sort, it's the end of, let's put it there, the end of the Western military superiority as they put out these sort of weapons, and or you feel that it's just the beginning of a new arm race? Where are we going?
The Russians don't think in terms of arms race. The Russians think in terms of defending the homeland and being strategically secure and having means to respond to any sort of attack in a fulminating, instantaneous manner, which they can. That's it. And of course, this comes from Soviet times. All this, it's not that one day they decided, okay, let's build something called Poseidon, super underwater torpedo that can loiter everywhere and then receives a command and boom. No, this started during Soviet era, starting in the 70s. There's a continuity of scientific mastery that comes from the Soviet Union, the fathers of the nuclear program in Russia for that. So it's no wonder, because of their competence and their seriousness, that they are at least two generations, if not three, ahead of the US. No, Europe Europe is in the 10th century compared to Russia. So it's crazy because in less than 1 year, they can announce Oreshnik, test it in the battleground. They can test the Brevesnik. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Stormbringer, because I'm thinking Deep Purple terms.
Yeah, it's Brevesnik.
Brevesnik, exactly. But in my head is Stormbringer because it's the title of the Deep Purple album that probably inspired a lot of Soviet scientists. Deep Purple was always immensely popular in the Soviet Union and in Russia. Tested successfully. Poseidon, even wow. And Putin said, look, when we tested Bureveshnik and Poseidon, there were some NATO ships loitering around. So we wanted them to see it. And no wonder it's total thunderous silence coming from NATO staff. It's not my accent. They don't even know what that is. So it's really something from outer space. It's like a meteorite from outer space. And of course, the Khabarovsk nuclear submarine, which can deliver, numbers vary, but at least 6 Poseidons. All that in less than 1 year. And Putin said, look, this is just the beginning. There's much more coming. The development of Oreshnik, building a collection of Oreshniks, Sarmat, you name it. So is this an ostentatious demonstration of force? No. It's Russia doing what it has to do to protect Russian lands. And of course, it should be interpreted by adversaries and enemies as don't mess with the bear. You have no idea. In fact, you won't even see what hit you. You won't survive it, for that matter. And of course, we're still gonna have that gaggle of imbeciles saying, the Russians are bluffing. We need to test them. Let's provoke them a little bit more. Well, one day they're going to get it. Lots of people have written volumes on Putin's patience or Putin's refusal to inflict something really hardcore on, especially on NATO. There is a debate in high levels of power in Russia about all that, but they won't deviate from their overall strategy, modernizing their hypersonic and nuclear arsenal way beyond anybody else. And of course, if there is any sort of attack against Russia, that's it. They have all it takes. What this tells the global south, that's a long discussion. For instance, the Chinese got the picture years ago, and they are modernizing their armed forces at breakneck speed. They're still far away from Russia in terms of missiles and hypersonics, nuclear, etc. But they have what it takes to be at least close to Russia in a matter of years, you know. And the global south as a whole, you look at Russia as, wow, okay, if anything happens, maybe we can count on Russia to shield us from direct attacks. That opens another can of worms because we don't know. And for instance, true test of how far Russia would go would be a direct attack on Venezuela. We still don't know how Russia would react. There is a strategic deal between Caracas and Moscow. Moscow already sent a lot of stuff to Caracas and will continue to send more. Same as Moscow sent a lot of very interesting stuff to Tehran. And the Chinese also did the same thing. So does this mean that if there is a next direct Israeli-American attack against Iran, Russia and China will be directly involved? We don't know, even though there are strategic partnerships. So in fact, Russia is being tested severely, especially in these two fronts. In the Sahel as well, if there is a destabilization of Mali, Russia will have to do something to help Mali because the alliance of Sahel states, they have a close relationship with Moscow. So the provocations never stop, Nima. And of course, the Russian leadership, they know that. And they have to be very, very measured, forceful, and at the same time, they need to be incisive enough if their interests are directly attacked. For instance, what happened in Syria? That's a very, very complicated discussion that Russia abandoned Syria. No, Russia saw where this thing was going from Idlibistan to Aleppo, northern Syria. They knew the mood in the armed forces. They knew that people were being bribed in the armed forces. So they had to adapt. They could not intervene even if Assad himself was not able to intervene or to defend his position. So now what Russia is doing, they are making the best of what they already have, which their presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. They won't lose that. From the beginning, they talked to the head chopper and said, look, we're not leaving our bases. And now it's in the interest of the head chopper to have Russia over there in this western part of Syria. For all practical purposes, we all know Syria is being carved up. Turks in the north, Americans in the northeast, Israel in the south, Russia in the west. And there's that little Syria that will be managed by the head chopper and his Idlibistan fellows. We don't know how long this thing is going to last, if it's going to last. If it's going to be effective, probably not. But from the Russian strategic point of view of we are in the Eastern Mediterranean and we're not leaving, it works for them. Okay, I understand the criticism and I understand the horror of people who have been defending Syria for over 10 years. But that's not how real politics works. This is the real world. And of course, Russia is looking, Eastern Mediterranean is very, very important for Russia, not only now, but for the foreseeable future. And of course, if Turkey is in Syria, Russia has also to be in Syria. There's no question about that.
You mentioned these studies about these new missiles have started during the Soviet era. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean that Russia can now build nuclear powered missiles using only domestic, parts? And the question would be, has Western sanctions ironically fueled a Russian tech renaissance?
No, this was already going on, Nima. Let's say it accelerated uh, at least the effort to be totally self sufficient, which is something that the Chinese are doing in their, I would say, direct, indirect tech war against the US. Chinese objective in the long run is the same as Russia, to be totally self sufficient. That Russian passenger jet, 100% Russian. They don't need anything from Boeing or from Airbus or whatever, and on their hypersonic nuclear program, even more, because this is a matter of very, very hardcore national security. So you have to be totally self-sufficient. But I would say the stupidity of the sanctions tsunami only accelerated a process that was already there. But of course, we forgot to mention those chips from washing machines. They perform miracles, don't they?
Poor Europeans. But Pepe, Putin says that these new weapons will ensure strategic parity for the whole 21st century.
Well, did you see that he actually
Yeah,
said the whole 21st century?
yeah.
This means that the scientists told him, look, we are so far ahead of the Americans and everybody else, and we're going to continue on the same rhythm. So we'll always be at least two, if not three generations ahead of anybody else for the rest of the century. He's basically quoting his scientists.
Exactly. When it comes to your understanding of what's going on, is parity even the goal anymore? Or is it about deterrence through unpredictability?
It's about no holds barred deterrence. Deterrence to a point that anybody, the only ones who have the capability to do something will be the Americans. They will have to think, an eternity in a minute before doing anything stupid against the Russian Federation. It's when you have top of the line deterrence that nobody else has. This is what they're thinking, and they have already achieved it in practice, and they're still working on it. There will be new Brevesniks and new Oreshniks coming.
President of the United States said that during the interview he had on 60 Minutes, he said that Russia and China are testing nuclear bombs and some sort of nuclear tests they're doing, and they're not they don't say anything about it. Behind the scene, they're doing this, secretly they're doing this, which in the same interview, they showed the commander and who had the exact he knew what's going on with Russia and China with the case of testing nuclear. I don't remember his name, but he said that there is no evidence that Russia and China are testing nuclear bombs. And Vladimir Putin has responded to Donald Trump's nuclear rhetoric, calling it a serious issue. He instructed Russia's Security Council and defense agencies to analyze US statements and prepare proposals on possible nuclear test readiness. What's going on, Scott? I think you are one of the qualified characters or person to talk about these issues when it comes to the arm control, nuclear bombs, and nuclear issues. What's your take on that?
My take is that the United States of America is governed by one of the dumbest men in the world, who doesn't understand the power of words. And before he speaks on topics such as this, he should probably get better briefed. This is a man who was told that the Russians had carried out 2 nuclear tests, one of the Brevesnik nuclear-powered cruise missile and the other of the Poseidon nuclear-powered underwater drone. Both of these are nuclear capable, meaning they can carry nuclear warheads. But the tests were of the nuclear propulsion systems. And so, he somehow in his brain decided that he was going to call these nuclear weapons tests. No, they're tests of nuclear delivery vehicles that happen to be nuclear powered. Maybe that's just too many nuclears for Trump's brain to handle. But the bottom line is, he spoke out and said, they're doing tests, so I'm going to order tests. Now, here's the important part. He said, I'm going to order the Secretary of War, that would be Pete Hegseth, to carry out a nuclear weapons test similar to what was done. And everybody freaked out and thought, oh my God, that means the United States is going to go and violate the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and start testing actual nuclear warheads. And yet today, the Secretary of War carried out his instructions. They tested a Minuteman III missile without a warhead. They tested the delivery system, very similar to what the tests that were done by, but we do this all the time. This isn't the first Minuteman III test this year. We've tested a whole range of Trident D5s, delivery systems, and it should not raise anybody's eyebrows. It shouldn't get anybody's pulse up. Then he turns around and he says things like, we know the Russians are testing in secret. We know the Chinese are testing in secret. Well, the secrecy are the tests of their missiles. Of course, they're secret. Russia's not going to broadcast that, hey, today we're going to flight test at Brevesnik, although apparently a NATO ship was monitoring the test and the Russians didn't do anything to disguise it. But your words matter. And so now you're the Russians and you have to be pragmatic. You have to say, is this guy just stupid? The answer, of course, is an unqualified yes. You can't run your policy based upon, we're just interpreting his words as stupidity. His words could also be interpreted to be that the United States believes that Russia and China are carrying out secret nuclear weapons tests, and therefore the United States must be prepared to carry out tests of its own. But if that's the case, then it isn't the Secretary of War that's going to handle that. It'll be a completely different American agency responsible for the upkeep of nuclear weapons, and the Department of Energy. And there's no evidence that we are getting ready to do a nuclear test. And there's no evidence that the Russians or the Chinese have been doing or getting ready. All countries do what are known as subcritical testing. That is, we test the nuclear device model in a manner that tests everything except the actual fission event. We don't get that fission event. And then we extrapolate based upon data whether or not the weapon would work, et cetera. Everybody does that. And that is in compliance with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. But now the Russians are listening to the president's word. You see, the Russian president told his foreign ministry and intelligence services and defense department to assess what the president's saying. Hey, guys, if you're watching this show, I just told you what I think it is. Don't panic. This is just Trump being Trump. Sorry about that. The other thing people need to understand is that the United States Congress has funded every year the Department of Energy to be prepared to resume nuclear testing on short notice if needed. And there's a lot of pressure here in the United States for the U.S. government to withdraw from the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and begin testing nuclear weapons designs. Our bombs are old designs, and many of these bombs have to be all the bombs eventually have to be maintained over time. They're not just the plutonium pits which have to be reworked and upgraded over time, but there's also other nuclear isotopes that are involved in this that lose potency over time, and certain gases have to be reinserted in certain quantities. A weapon has to be maintained, and if you want a nuclear deterrent system, you have to be assured that the weapons will work as designed, or else, because if you're not assured, the enemy's not going to be assured. And if they think your weapons aren't going to work, you lose that edge. And so there are many people saying, look, our weapons are so old, we need to do some testing, limited testing, just to confirm that what we're doing works, the weapons worked as designed. Maybe we have some new weapons that we'd like to test, the W76-2 low yield nuclear warhead. We'd like to test that to confirm that works as advertised. But so far, the treaty is held. Our commitment to no nuclear testing stands, and I believe it stands to this day. I don't believe the president has given any direction to anybody involved in actual nuclear weapons testing to begin to prepare for a nuclear weapons test. He simply, because he's dumber than dirt, he uses words that have meanings that he doesn't mean to impart. That's what I think is going on here.
Scott, how did we get here? You remember we talked about Tulsi Gabbard. It seems to me that she's isolated within the Trump administration. Nobody cares about what she's talking about. Any issue, domestic issue, foreign issue. What is that, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, we're dealing with a president that doesn't understand effective staff work and doesn't understand what it means to be part of a team. He envisions himself as the captain of a team that he doesn't trust. He only trusts himself or a handful of people around him. Tulsi Gabbard was made the director of national intelligence, but we saw early on in her tenure that, he doesn't heed her advice when she spoke to him about Iran, for instance, and their nuclear program. And I would imagine that today, when she speaks about other issues like Venezuela or Russia and nuclear weapons, that he's not heeding that as well, that he listens to a tighter inner circle that she's not part of. It appears that he listens more to the director of the CIA, who is more politically aligned with Trump. He listens more to Marco Rubio, which I just don't understand, because Rubio hates him with a passion and despises him. And yet he's empowered Rubio not just as a Secretary of State, but as the National Security Advisor, which means Rubio runs honcho over all of these policy issues. He listens to Sebastian Gorka. He listens to Keith Kellogg. The person he should be listening to is the person that's empowered by law to talk to him. The presidential daily briefing is done by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, not by the CIA. And so it's Tulsi Gabbard that is the one who is supposed to be providing him with the daily dose of information. But this president has boxed her out. She has a specific politicized job to do, which is to go back and put her focus on the 2016 Russiagate scandal, and she's doing that job very well. But she's not. The job of the director of national intelligence isn't that of a forensic investigator. They should be looking forward, looking into the future, providing the president with the best intelligence possible about the world we live in. And unfortunately, the person that's best positioned to do that isn't being allowed to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned the situation within the administration, but outside the administration, he's attacking Rand Paul as well, which was one of the few Republicans defending him during the Russiagate. And right now he feels somehow threatened by what Rand Paul is talking about. Is that a serious issue with Donald Trump? How do you see these people who, somehow attacking Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, the people who doesn't agree on some issues with him, not totally. He's not patient in his way of treating them, of dealing with them.
Welcome to the cult of personality, because that's what we have. We don't have a functioning democracy. We don't have an institution that respects diverse opinions and respects the process of debate, dialogue, and discussion that normally is supposed to take place as complicated policies are put together. This is how you get a bipartisan consensus on things, so that as policy go forward, you have support on both sides of the aisle. This is a winner-take-all approach by a man who views himself as a literal king. He doesn't view himself as the president of the United States. He views himself as the dictator of the United States. And it's a cult of personality. It's literally what Donald wants, Donald gets. I mean, when was the last time you saw an American president gather all people around, put their hands out as if he is the conduit to God, praying to God through him? In America, where state religion is verboten, and yet he's posturing himself as if he is the conduit to God for so many. This is dangerous. I mean, this is really, really dangerous. It's dysfunctional in terms of actual democracy. It's dysfunctional in terms of how this constitutional republic is designed to work. It's three separate but equal branches of government. And yet what Donald Trump is doing is bullying both the judiciary and the legislative branch into falling in line. He said if people go against him, he's going to ruin them. He's talking about Republican senators. I mean, this is very, very dangerous times that we live in, because we are governed by a man who appears not to recognize constitutional limits and appears to be prepared to put all the power that does in fact accrue to him to use it in any way he sees fit. The Constitution be damned. So when we talk about, the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, understand this: Russia is on an irreversible path when it comes to Ukraine. There will be no stopping. There won't be no backing up. They will continue down this path until they achieve the outcome that they desire. And that outcome has been explained in great detail, not only to Ukraine, but to the United States and indirectly to Europe. There are no surprises here. Everybody knows what Russia expects to happen before you can talk about cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, etc. And I think what we're seeing is that the Trump administration understands this reality, and they also understand that they can't vocalize a policy that embraces this Russian outcome. So they're washing their hands of Ukraine, putting the burden on Europe. And that is the American position on Ukraine right now. So, there are no surprises here. This war, unfortunately, is going to finish the old-fashioned way. And that is the Russians are going to kill every Ukrainian out there until the Ukrainians stop fighting. There will be no negotiated settlement. There will be an unconditional surrender. When that happens, I don't know. Russians aren't putting a timeline on it, but the idea that there could, that this war can stop and there will be a negotiated peace, that's out. Russia is committed to winning this war. They've always been committed. They have diplomacy interject itself and fast forward, some of the processes through negotiation. But now it appears that Ukraine is incapable of doing that, and Europe and the United States are unwilling to do that. And so Russia will force the issue on the battlefield. All you pro-Ukrainian yahoots out there, you can read whatever you want. Prokofsk is falling. Ukrainians are dying. Kupiansk is going to fall. And then we could just go on and on and on. The war is going to end in Russia's favor. And the only thing that's going to change besides the territorial losses is the tally of dead. And far more Ukrainians are going to die than Russians. That's the harshest reality there is.
Venezuela, let's talk about what's going on in Venezuela. Do you think what is going on every time Donald Trump says nothing going to happen, we're not going to attack Venezuela? I feel that the attack is, we're getting closer to the attack, US attack on Venezuela, because it was the same case with Iran. And every time he said, no, we're not, we're negotiating, we're getting somewhere with Iran. How do you think if they attack Venezuela, it's going to be like the attack on Iran, with drones, something internal, CIA, or they're going to do something like what they did in Syria? They're going to capture the oil infrastructure, the main, resources of the country, then put pressure on the government. Or maybe the third option would be the attack on the military facilities, on the military bases in Venezuela. Then, I don't know, do some sort of decapitation together with that. What's your take on that?
I think we have to filter everything through the reality of American domestic politics. The Republicans got their butts handed to them in these recent elections. And the Republicans, MAGA, has to sit back and say, what happened and why did this happen? What aren't we doing right in terms of communicating? And it seems to me the worst possible course of action would be get America involved in a ground war in Venezuela that drags on and has body bags coming home. There's no scenario that can be implemented today that resolves the Venezuelan problem absolutely before midterm elections. And the reality is every option you just outlined probably has Americans dying in the lead up to midterm elections, which I don't think will go well for the Trump administration. And so I think you're going to see a lot of talking, continued peripheral attacks like the boats. The CIA will continue to put pressure on Maduro. If something happens where a window of opportunity avails itself for regime change, et cetera, maybe they pull the trigger. But I would be surprised if Trump, made a straight out military move to remove Maduro, because it would require, the suppression of Venezuelan military forces that are known to be loyal to Maduro. It would require seizure of critical infrastructure, including oil fields, and it would require, the physical elimination of Maduro, either kill or capture. This is the reality. So, and these require a lot of troops and almost a definite long-term presence of troops on the ground in Venezuela, in a nation where there is the real potential for openly hostile resistance. For a president who ran on a platform of peace, I have a hard time seeing him try to win midterm elections, selling a war of choice to the American people in Venezuela.
Do you think that Venezuela is receiving aid from Russia, Iran, and China? And how deep are they helping Venezuela if that's the case?
I believe they are. I believe we see evidence of that. I don't know. We have some people in the Russian Duma talking about Oreshnik going to Venezuela. I don't think so. I mean, if you want to guarantee that the United States floods Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, go ahead and deploy Oreshnik to Venezuela. It's a strategic system, by the way. Venezuela, you're not going to hand Venezuela that capability. But I do see anti-shipping capability, anti-air capability, maybe some training assistance. I do believe the three nations, but the reality is Venezuela is a long way from any of these countries. And once the war starts, Venezuela will be cut off. So you're not going to be able to have an active supply line, supplying weapons and such. And so the best bet for these people is to, maybe shore up Venezuela's defenses where there are some deficiencies, but to seek a nonviolent outcome to this, use diplomacy to your advantage. And, there's an opportunity now because of the reality of American domestic politics. Again, I can't guarantee what Donald Trump's going to do. And maybe he'll wake up tomorrow and say, launch the boats. But I believe that if he is to strike Venezuela, it has to happen very soon and very decisively so that he has victory presented to the American people by the summer of 2026. Otherwise, if you're caught up in a quagmire where body bags are coming home and there's no firm victory, this will not go well for him at the polls in November. And then his presidency is over. Yes, he'll have 2 more years, but he'll be fighting impeachment from a Democratic-controlled Congress. So I think you have to factor domestic politics into any discussion about the potential of conflict with Venezuela.